Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences globally. Welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew, and we're following developing news on several fronts tonight. It's election eve in America, and just 34 days now into a government shutdown. Tonight, a potential reprieve for SNAP recipients. What the administration is saying today after a judge ruling on the issue, and more on the shutdown when we're joined by Congressman Jim McGovern in just a few moments. Plus, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook speaks out why she says the labor market poses a great risk to the economy, a greater one than inflation, and what that means for another interest rate cut next month when we speak with Lael, Brainard, former vice chair of the Fed. Also tonight, the $38 billion Amazon deal with OpenAI for Nvidia chips, the fuel it's giving to the Mag 7 as investors bet on the AI future. We'll have more when we go to Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick for tonight's Power Moves. And can Mamdani win New York? Will Democrats sweep Virginia and New Jersey's governor races? Will Republicans eke out a win? We'll discuss the high-stakes races in tomorrow's election when pollster Frank Luntz joins us this hour. But we begin tonight with the government shutdown, which has now entered its 6th week. And news the Trump administration will comply with a court order to fund food aid benefits for November. However, the administration says it will only fund 50% of that amount that eligible households normally receive. For all the details, now we turn to Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who joins us live from the North Lawn of the White House. Tyler, what can you tell us?
Yeah, hey, Joe, good evening. Well, you said it. The Department of Justice confirming that it will comply with a court order to partially fund key food aid benefits known as SNAP, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, through at least November while the government shutdown drags on. Nearly 1 in 8 Americans receive food benefits from the program, and at this point, millions of Americans woke up on November 1st without their accounts fully replenished. It's unclear how quickly these recipients will get their relief, though the White House says it's working diligently. But as we heard from House Speaker Mike Johnson earlier today, he outlined that the process is a complicated one.
It's not as easy as hitting go send on a computer. You got to go through and recalculate partial payments to the 42 million recipients of the program. The easiest way to get full SNAP payments to everybody who's eligible is for the Democrats to come in here and vote to reopen the government on a clean, nonpartisan CR.
November SNAP benefits will be funded through $4.65 billion in USDA contingency funds, which will cover 50% of eligible households' current allotment from the program. The plan leaves no money for new applicants, and there are questions on what will happen if the shutdown keeps dragging on. It would take between $8 and $9 billion to fully fund the payments in November. Of course, SNAP benefits lapsing on November 1st was seen as one of those pressure points that might bring lawmakers back together to the table. And Joe, as you well know, now that we haven't really seen much movement, we're seeing President Trump double down on his call that he would like to eliminate the filibuster. Of course, this is the so-called nuclear option, and it would only take a simple majority to amend the rule, but it would take Senate Majority Leader John Thune on board to introduce it. And at this point, we've gotten no indications that he would support such a plan.
Tyler, fascinating. I have to ask you about this report in the Wall Street Journal today about Nvidia by way of the White House. We've spent so much time talking about export controls and whether Blackwell should be on the table with regard to national security involving trade talks. Now, Trump officials reportedly torpedoed Nvidia's push to export AI chips to China. Who pulled the president in off the ledge on this?
Right, exactly, Joe. According to the Wall Street Journal, the effort was led by Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Of course, not surprising, considering when Marco Rubio was in the Senate, he was considered one of the staunchest China hawks. In fact, I recall almost a year ago this month, then Senator Marco Rubio had sent a letter to then Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo urging the Biden administration to assume a posture that was presumed deniability when it came to export licenses related to critical technology and China. Now, we did get a statement from the Trump administration in response to the Wall Street Journal's reporting, saying that the president listens to an array of voices, but that ultimately President Trump's historic meeting with, quote, President Xi proves, however, that the only factor guiding his decision-making is in the best interest of the American people. We know that he was up against this rhetoric, that this could cause national security concerns down the line. But Joe was balancing that with the calls from Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang, who has been trying to regain Chinese market access since 2022.
Tyler, thank you so much. Tyler Kendall reporting live from the White House this evening, and we're staying in Washington for now, where Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook delivered remarks today, giving us a glimpse of what we can expect in the Fed's next meeting in December. Cook pointing to one issue, while stopping short of endorsing another interest rate cut next month. Let's listen.
Given that we are likely moving in the right direction, I thought a 25 basis point cut was appropriate. But again, December is a live meeting, and I'm attentive to all the indicators that I mentioned and many others. So it's a balancing act, and it always is.
Joining us now with all the details from Lisa Cook's remarks today, Bloomberg's Michael McKee. It's great to see you in your neck of the woods. Mike, what does this tell us about the Fed meeting in December and the dissent in the FOMC?
Well, it's clearly a divided Fed. We've heard from a number of Fed officials who came out after the blackout ended on Friday, talking about why they thought we should not be cutting interest rates again. And we're waiting for those to come out who will say December should be another rate cut. We had Stephen Myron on Bloomberg Television this morning saying that, but that's no surprise to anybody. Lisa Cook has not spoken since July. And of course, Joe, the thing that everybody wanted to hear from her today was something about her legal case and the administration's efforts to fire her. And she said, I appreciate everybody's kind words, but this is an ongoing legal case, so I can't say anything more about it, which is also kind of what we expected. But she did take the view that it's an open question whether they want to cut rates or not, although she said she sees the current policy rate as remaining modestly restrictive, which suggests if you are worried about inflation, and she did have some concerns about that maybe she's okay with not cutting again in December.
They're working in a world without data, of course, not going to get a jobs report in a couple of days as we would normally. What does that do to their view?
Well, it makes it harder for them, and it makes it harder in a sales sense, selling whatever they're going to do to the people on Wall Street and to the American people. But they do have enough alternative data that they have a pretty good picture of what's going on. And as Jay Powell said in his news conference last week, if there's a turning point in the economy, we'll be able to pick it up with all of the data that we do have. And so unless something goes completely pear-shaped, we're going to have a pretty good idea of where we are, even if we don't have the exact coordinates.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Bloomberg's Michael McKee with us on Balance of Power as we now add the perspective of Lael Brainard, the former vice chair of the Fed, joining us live from the nation's capital. Lael, it's great to have you back on Bloomberg TV and radio. Do you agree with Lisa Cook that the job market is a greater risk to the economy now than inflation?
Well, I certainly think that she laid out her views for the first time in many months. It was very important to hear how she was thinking about the outlook because, of course, she votes every meeting. And I think we heard from her that she sees risks on both sides, but she is very closely aligned with Chair Powell and also with Governor Waller in seeing the greater risk to the labor market. And I think it is the case that even without data, we do know that the inflation side, we did actually get some additional data that were somewhat reassuring. On the labor side, we really haven't seen anything that would push members who were inclined to cut in December in the opposite direction. So I think the preponderance is still likely to see a cut, but we are seeing that the hawks are getting more dug in, and it's clearly a divided committee.
Did you agree with her decision to not specifically call for a rate cut based on the uncertainty that we're seeing, for instance, around tariffs?
Well, I do think it's important that the members of the committee, at a time where there are strong views on both sides, make clear that they are open to hearing the views on the other side and potentially new data, new information, changing their view. But my sense is that the people who wrote down that they wanted to see 3 cuts in September still are on track wanting to see that additional cut in December.
Is that a difficult consideration, knowing how little data that we're receiving right now in the throes of this government shutdown?
I think it would be if they were thinking about the inflation side. But because there's a lot of anecdotal evidence, there's private sector sources, there's really nothing to suggest that the labor market has strengthened in a surprising way. And so those people who go into December with concerns about the softness in the labor market really see no reason, I think, to rethink their views. And likewise, the hawks, the people who say, look, we're at 3% on inflation. We've been above 2% now for 43 months. The inflation rate's going in the wrong direction. there's really nothing to change their views either. And that's why I think you're seeing that divided committee going into December.
What does division mean for this Federal Reserve? To Michael McKee's point, we haven't seen this type of dissent for some time.
Well, it was interesting, wasn't it, to see that there was a dissent on both the hawkish side and the dovish side. And we have heard a number of members of the committee since that time come out and say they were uncomfortable with the October decision and they do not favor an additional cut in December. I think what division at this point means is they can take a cut and then pause. They can pause for a meeting and then cut. But the language in the statement suggested it's more likely that the chair will try to guide to a cut and then reassure the hawks that they will hold following that in the early months of the new year.
I have to ask you about learning resources versus Trump and the Supreme Court case that we'll hear argued on Wednesday of this week that could mean the end of the line for the current tariff regime that we're seeing. Granted, the administration has said there are other avenues to putting tariffs in place if this doesn't work. But I'm wondering if you see economic ramifications here or just continued uncertainty. Do you think he'll prevail in this case?
Well, I think we'll learn a lot from those arguments on Wednesday. Of course, we won't have an outcome on Wednesday, but we'll learn a lot about where the justices are leaning. And if they are leaning in the direction of saying that the executive branch has overstepped their authority under IEEPA, because there is no national emergency of that nature or because tariffs are not used under IEEPA. In that case, there are multiple other sections of tariff law that can be used, and they can essentially put in place tariffs that are as high as the one that we see today. But it will narrow the discretion of the president to make some of the pronouncements that he's been making over the last few months, calling for a certain level of tariff and being able to implement it very quickly. That won't be possible with the other authorities that he would have available to him. So a little bit more certainty. But the other important thing is, recall, this administration is really focused on tariffs because they want the revenue. And one of the important implications, if their use of IEEPA gets overturned, is the potential that they may need to refund up to $100 billion to those importers. And that, of course, bites their revenue projections, which would be, for them, I think, problematic.
That would be quite a development. Lael Brainard, former vice chair of the Fed, we thank you, as always, for the insights on Bloomberg. Coming up, Kimberly-Clark agreeing to buy Kenvue for some $40 billion following the Tylenol maker's battle with the Trump administration. We'll bring you the details up ahead. But first, the government shutdown has now entered its 6th week, with the Trump administration now saying it will comply with a court order to fund food aid benefits for November. We'll talk this out with Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
If you're governing based on politics, this is why crap doesn't get done. There's no reason to shut the government down. All you're doing is creating hardship for the American people. It's wrong. I don't care who's quote-unquote winning based on the polls. The American people are losing because of the stupidity being played in Washington. Pass the Clean CR, fund the government, make sure programs like SNAP and WIC have the resources needed for the American people to put food on their tables. It's not a game.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. That was Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York today, talking with me on the early edition about the state of the government shutdown, which has now entered its 34th day, if you're still keeping track. Lawler's comments coming the same day the Trump administration said it would comply with a court order to fund U.S. food aid benefits for November, SNAP benefits, but only a 50% of the amount that eligible households normally receive. Joining me now with his perspective from across the aisle, live from Capitol Hill, is Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts. He's ranking member of the House Rules Committee, and we should note senior member of the House Agriculture Committee, and someone who has taken the issue of nutrition under his wing for the better part of his congressional career. Congressman, I remember you holding the first nutrition summit at the White House. I believe it was 2022. We've come a long way from there, haven't we?
We have, and back then I was filled with hope that we would not only be able to advance policies to promote better nutrition, but we would also advance policies to end hunger in this country. We're the richest country in the history of the world. We got 46 million Americans who don't know where the next meal is going to come from. We all should be ashamed by that fact. And this administration is making things worse by trying to cancel SNAP benefits, and they have the authority to fully pay everybody's SNAP benefits. It really is the ultimate in cruelty.
You know, Mr. Lawler and other Republicans I've spoken to on the air here said that Democrats voted to defund SNAP when they voted against the continuing resolution repeatedly. What would be your response?
Well, first of all, there's a contingency fund, which the court has now ordered the president to draw down. Yeah. But then the president has the ability to be able to move money around in USDA. I mean, he's able to find money to pay masked ICE agents who are wreaking havoc on our communities. He found $40 billion to bail out some right-wing cuckoo clock in Argentina, but he can't find it within his heart to make sure that 40 million Americans get the food that they need to be able to survive. I mean, like, what's wrong with this guy? And so, look, you know, this is a problem that doesn't have to exist. The president has the authority to fully implement SNAP in a way that everybody gets their benefits.
So how does this end, Congressman? You've been at this for some time. You were chair of the Rules Committee in a recent session of Congress, and you know what it's like to do some deal making. But we keep hearing no one's talking. You're in Washington right now, but the House has been out of session for 45 days, if my count is still correct. Where are the off-ramps? Every time something gets paid for, whether it's SNAP or military paychecks, seems to remove another pain point.
Well, one is, I mean, Speaker Johnson ought to call Republicans back. I mean, they've been on a 7-week vacation. Come back and do your job. They're always demanding more work requirements on poor people for SNAP and Medicaid. We ought to have work requirements on the Republicans that if you don't show up, then you don't get paid. You need to come together, and we need to have a discussion. And look, Congressman Lawler is wrong. This is not a clean CR. This includes the firings of countless federal employees and unilateral cuts that Trump doesn't have the authority to do, but he's done anyway without any pushback from the Republicans. And all we're saying is that if you need our votes, because you control everything, then don't screw over tens of millions of Americans on their health care. I mean, people are getting bills now where their health care premiums are doubling or tripling. I mean, they're going to lose their health care, or they're going to have to go without food because they won't be able to afford to pay for their health care and food together. So, I mean, that's the way out. Let's not screw over millions of people on their health care.
The president seems to think that ending the filibuster is the way out. Congressman, he talked about it on 60 Minutes. I'd like you to hear what he said, and we'll have you respond. Here's the president.
I think we should do the nuclear option. This is a totally different nuclear, by the way. It's called ending the filibuster. You know what? The Republicans have to get tougher. If we end the filibuster, we can do exactly what we want. We're not going to lose power. The theory is, oh, then we'll do it, but then when they get into power someday, they'll do it. That's true, but you know what?
So you think John
We're here right now. No, I like John Thune. I think he's terrific, but I disagree with him.
The president said on Truth Social that Democrats, if we don't do it now, Democrats will do it as soon as they're back in power. Is that true?
Well, you know, no, that's not true. And the president is just interested in getting more power for himself. I mean, he does think he's a king. But the bottom line is getting tougher. Getting tougher on who? The president ran for office on America First. You know, he said he was going to address the concerns that everyday Americans have. He's done the opposite. He's hurt everyday Americans. I mean, America First to me means feeding Americans. It means not allowing their health care premiums to double or triple. I mean, that's America First. All this president cares about is enriching himself and his kids and his family. I mean, he's the most corrupt U.S. president. I used to say the most corrupt U.S. president in recent history. I now would remove the word recent. It's a shameful what he's doing and all the money he's making, and he's more interested in remodeling the Lincoln bathroom and building this gaudy Marie Antoinette ballroom. I mean, really, the American people care about things that impact their lives directly. They look at life through their kitchen window. They want to be able to pay their health care bills. They want to be able to afford their groceries. Those are the issues that people want us to focus on. And that's why Mike Johnson ought to bring the Republicans back, and we ought to be able to work out a deal where people don't get screwed on their health care.
If this keeps going, though, Congressman, and we keep saying there are no signs of this ending anytime soon, if we start rolling up on Thanksgiving, for instance, would it behoove Democrats to vote for the CR just to reopen the government to help people get food, to keep people from going hungry?
Yeah. So here's the deal. I mean, we're being told that if you want to feed people, you have to take away their health care. I mean, these are choices that we should be making. The bottom line is government is supposed to be about helping people, not hurting people. And Mike Johnson and the Republicans and Donald Trump don't care about regular people. They really don't. They're more interested in enriching those who are already well off, either people who write out big checks for their pet causes and for their campaigns. I think people want us to focus in on issues that matter to them. And that's all I mean, really, it's a radical. Is it radical to want to make sure people don't have to pay double or triple for their health insurance bills? I mean, that's the issue. And Republicans are saying, who cares? They all have concierge health care. But the people I represent, they rely on their health insurance to be able to provide some sense of security in their lives and in the lives of their families.
Congressman McGovern, I have to ask you while you're with us about what's happening in the Caribbean, and that's, of course, due to a number of issues, including your longstanding relationship with Cuba and your efforts to normalize relations with the government of Cuba, something that, for full disclosure, I traveled to Cuba to cover in one of your final trips there during a previous administration. There's something going on off the coast of Venezuela. There's a flotilla that has been amassed that many are wondering what exactly will be used for. We just blew up another alleged drug boat that I think is approaching a dozen now at this point. Does this smack of regime change in Venezuela? What's about to happen?
Yeah, I have no idea what's about to happen, but I do know that what the president is doing is illegal under U.S. law and under international law. These are extrajudicial killings. And those aren't my words. Those are the words of Republican Senator Rand Paul. If he wants to do this kind of stuff, he needs to come to Congress and ask for authorization. I'm not even sure he's even briefed Congress. But if we had a functioning Congress, if the Republicans weren't so afraid of him, they would demand some accountability here, and they're saying nothing.
Rand Paul said that right on this program, as a matter of fact, Congressman, and he's on an island in the Republican Party. Is there any way that a War Powers Act could get votes to pass in the Senate?
Yeah, I would like to think there would be. I mean, going to war is a big deal.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is that it's easy to get into wars. It's hard as hell to get out of them. There ought to be a full debate, and there ought to be a vote. And people ought to take responsibility for what's going on. But what is happening right now is illegal. And I would hope that some of my Republican friends would have the guts to stand up and tell the president that to his face. There's a right way to do things, there's a wrong way to do things. The way the president is doing this is wrong.
Democratic Congressman Jim McGovern of Massachusetts, we thank you, as always, for the insights. Come back and see us again. Coming up tomorrow is Election Day. Eyes on key races, of course, in New Jersey, Virginia, and right here in New York City. And we're going to bring you the latest polling next. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. This morning, Kimberly-Clark agreed to buy Kenvue for roughly $40 billion, snapping up the embattled Tylenol maker's storied brands in a gamble that would vault the company behind Kleenex and other household names into the consumer health's top tier. Kimberly-Clark agreeing to pay a total consideration of about $21 per Kenvue share, a 46% premium to the Tylenol maker's closing price on Friday. The deal values Kenvue at $48.7 billion on an enterprise basis, the company said. However, the transaction exposes Kimberly-Clark to legal and political peril. as Kenvue is fighting, of course, a battle with the Trump administration over the safety of its biggest product, Tylenol. Joining us now with insight into that proposed deal, all the market moves of the day, Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick for this edition of Power Moves. Romaine?
Yeah, the legal and political peril, Joe, is really key here. A $40 billion price tag plus, if you will, but a lot of concerns about what this would actually mean longer term if some of those legal and political issues aren't resolved. While it was a great day for Kenvue, we should point out Kimberly-Clark, it actually had its worst one-day performance since 1987, a 15% drop in the stock. And remember, Kenvue used to be a public company just about 2.5 years ago. Used to be a private company 2.5 years ago under the umbrella of Johnson & Johnson, was spun off into as a public company, and now potentially going back under the umbrella of Kimberly-Clark. It'll be interesting, Joe, to see if maybe the management there can actually figure out a way to navigate some of these legal issues, particularly given the huge drop that we saw in the stock from Kenvue starting this summer when we got that report out of HHS here in the United States, the health department here in the United States, that made a somewhat tenuous link between Tylenol, the active ingredient in Tylenol, acetaminophen, and autism, a tenuous link that we should point out that the health secretary has walked back just a little bit. We should point out, though, Joe, that the broader market today was really rallying on the back of AI and a lot of optimism in that space when it comes to AI spending. $40 billion might be a big chunk for Kimberly-Clark to peel off, but it's chump change for OpenAI. OpenAI actually agreeing to spend about $38 billion over 7 years to buy computing power from Amazon. And this is on the back of a deal that Amazon had already made, Amazon Web Services, just a couple of weeks ago. In addition, we also heard from Microsoft, which is actually going to spend about $10 billion to lease computing power from a neo hyperscaler called Iran. That deal is now going to take effect, and we now add to what has now been about roughly, if my math is right, Joe, about $600 billion in investments from those big cap companies here in the United States on AI computing power this year alone.
Wow. Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick with the numbers. We thank you, Romaine, as always. Tomorrow is Election Day, of course, with governor's races in Virginia and New Jersey becoming a close head-to-head in recent weeks, while polling has shown Zohran Mamdani maintaining his lead in the New York City mayor's race. Tomorrow's races, though, are the biggest tranche of elections since Donald Trump reclaimed the presidency in the first barometer of voter sentiment ahead of the 2026 midterm elections. And joining us now with insight into tomorrow, its larger implications for the state party politics, is Frank Luntz, politics and communications consultant and pollster and CEO of FIL. Frank, it's great to see you. We couldn't have an election without you here. And I'm just wondering, as you look across these races, you know, guys like me are going to try to make everything into a bellwether. Which race will you be watching closely for insights into national trends in politics across America?
Oh, that's easy, because I think the Republicans are going to have a bad night tomorrow night.
Huh.
In the end, we'll be surprised if they win in Virginia or if they win in New Jersey. The governor's race is there. I think Mamdani is going to be the next mayor of New York. And I think the race to watch is none of those. It's the California redistricting ballot initiative, because that's going to determine who controls Congress. If the Democrats are successful, if they win that initiative, it will be 5, maybe even 6 seats switching from Republican to Democrat as they carve up the state more politically. Now, all that's going to do is blunt the impact of Texas, which Republicans just used to gain 4 House seats. You got North Carolina, the Republicans have redistricted. Ohio, Republicans have engaged there. Kansas, even in Kansas, you can have 1 seat towards the GOP. But the Democrats are doing exactly the same thing. In California, they filed a lawsuit in New York to be able to redistrict that state. A lot of these require constitutional approvals, and that requires a vote of the public. That California initiative is going to have a bigger impact on American politics than anything that happens between now and Election Day 2026.
Fascinating. So you're predicting a Democratic sweep tomorrow night?
Yes, I am. And it does not relate to President Trump. It does not relate to national trends. Now, make no mistake, the president's numbers are down.
Yeah.
And yet he gets credit for foreign policy. He gets credit for bringing the hostages home in Israel. He gets credit for attempting to move forward Ukraine and Russia. But still, the way that the voters usually react in an off-year election, which this is that they punish the party in power. It just happens every 2 years. And I think it's going to happen this time, too.
Well, you know, it's really interesting because we talked about costs a lot over the course of the last campaign. That was one of many issues that drove Donald Trump back into the White House. He's underwater on issues involving the economy in several polls that we saw from over the weekend. And it is the same issue that seems to be propelling Zohran Mamdani to the mayorship in New York. You're getting whiplash here as the pendulum swings?
And I applaud you personally for using costs rather than inflation, because that's what voters say about it.
Huh.
And it's a simple equation: H squared, F squared, food and fuel, housing and healthcare. If you're upper middle class, you want to live in the house of your dreams and you want to have the healthcare you need. If you're working class, or what I call paycheck to paycheck voters, you're focused on food and fuel, being able to live the day-to-day necessities that you need so much. And the fact is, in some areas, it has come down. In other areas, it is not. In the state of California, where people will be voting tomorrow, inflation, affordability is still the number one issue, and it's still affecting voters. And yes, to see the Democrats now using the issue that Donald Trump used so effectively in 2024 is political whiplash, but I expect it. Both political parties are trying hard to be on the side of the American consumer and be on the side of making things more affordable.
You mentioned the Trump effect and the fact that that is not what's propelling a Democratic sweep tomorrow night. We were just showing his approvals from the Washington Post, ABC News Ipsos poll, underwater for approval over the weekend here. Could he have done more? Is this truly a one-point race in New Jersey? And could he have done more to push Chitterelli across the line?
Well, the thing is, I went through this 4 years ago when it looked like the incumbent was going to get beaten by the Republican. And in fact, with about 60, 70% of the vote in, the Republican was tied. And in the end, when all the ballots were counted, it was a, 7, 8 point race. The Republicans in New Jersey always close at the end. But the Democrats in New Jersey always win in the end. It's been 3 elections since Chris Christie.
Yeah.
New Jersey is a Democratic state. I expect the Democrat to win that race. And the Republican keeping it close shows you how important the economy is and shows you that in New Jersey, they don't want to pay more in taxes.
If Mamdani wins, as you expect, and becomes the next mayor of New York, what does that say about the future of the Democratic Party and the messaging that will go into the midterms? Or is he an outlier because, well, New York is New York, Frank?
And exactly, once again, exactly. But what does it say? It says that a progressive, a sharp progressive, take no prisoners progressive, and an unabashedly progressive individual is popular within the Democratic Party. And I believe that you're going to see the Democrats move further to the left, just as you see the Republicans become more and more MAGA. And in the end, this pulling apart, this fracturing of our democracy is not something short term. I think it's significant. I think it's going to be with us for a while. And I think it's going to become harder and harder for Republicans and Democrats to talk to each other, to work together with each other, and to get things done. And that's not good for democracy.
Does the shutdown impact decisions in a state like Virginia, teaming with federal employees, or even in both states, Frank, with furloughed workers, with SNAP benefits hitting a wall over the weekend?
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever said this on live television. You actually don't need me, because what you're saying is exactly what I'm hearing from the voters. In Virginia, there are so many government employees or family members of government employees or someone whose best friend is a government employee, and they're fed up with this. You hear people complaining about airports being long lines and flights being delayed. You hear people complaining about not getting their paycheck, which is real. There are so many people in America that live paycheck to paycheck, and they can't afford to miss even one check. And right now they're in pressure, they're under pressure, and they're in trouble, which is why I actually expect the government to reopen by next week, be another week from now, because in the end, nobody wants to be held responsible for people literally starving.
Wow. Frank, it's always great to have you. Frank Luntz, Pollster, CEO, FIL, thank you for your insights. And make sure to tune into our election coverage for a special extended edition of Balance of Power tomorrow night. It starts at 5 p.m. Eastern, per usual, right here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Coming up, we'll continue our Election Day preview with a deep dive into the New York City mayoral race and President Trump's tacit endorsement next with our panel on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. Thanks for joining us. We're less than 12 hours away from Election Day here in the United States, with all eyes on New York City's mayoral contest. Democratic socialist Zohran Mamdani is leading in most polls, with former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo and Republican Curtis Sliwa trailing behind. President Trump has just weighed in during the final days of the campaign here and has tacitly endorsed the former New York governor. Here's what the president said while discussing the race last night on CBS's 60 Minutes.
It's going to be hard for me as the president to give a lot of money to New York because if you have a communist running New York, all you're doing is wasting the money you're sending there. So I don't know that he's won, and I'm not a fan of Cuomo one way or the other, but if it's going to be between a bad Democrat and a communist, I'm going to pick the bad Democrat all the time, to be honest with you.
Joining us now with his insight into this race, Bloomberg's Myles Miller. Myles, I guess we shouldn't be surprised by what the president said. I don't know if that actually adds up to an actual endorsement, but he just posted a few moments ago on Truth Social, writing, "We must remember this. A vote for Curtis Sliwa, who looks much better without the beret, is a vote for Mamdani."
Yeah, you know, it was actually interesting. Cuomo today said that it wasn't an endorsement, what he said last night on 60 Minutes. He said, in fact, what the president's saying is he doesn't want a socialist in Gracie Mansion. Well, this all boils down to a fight over who is going to be best to be the person who fills the role that was currently Eric Adams. Now, what we know is that there has been significant turnout in this race. We're talking about 735,000 people who have already voted, and this is really pulling together one of the biggest broad-based coalitions of any mayor's race, right? This is one of the biggest mayor's race since Giuliani versus Dinkins. What we have seen in the neighborhoods alone is that South Asians and particularly low-income voters in low-income neighborhoods have come out in some of the largest numbers we've ever seen. Initially, the early voting tallies told us that boomers were the ones who were doing a number of the sort of the key voting blocks there. But what we learned is that in the last couple of days of the early voting is that young people came out in large numbers. And, you know, as you want to talk about the neighborhoods here, Jackson Heights, Parkchester, Washington Heights, when you compare that with Park Slope, Windsor Terrace, and Jamaica. These are neighborhoods that have pretty liberal folks, but also people who have not been traditionally power centers as it relates to politics in this city. It'll be interesting to see what happens tomorrow, but it looks like it is going in Mamdani's way.
Well, it sure does. It doesn't really seem to matter the poll that you look at this point. Myles, the early vote has been a remarkable phenomenon here. Nearly 750,000 New Yorkers have already cast ballots from the numbers that I saw. So give us a sense tomorrow night of what you're going to be looking at. You're going to be playing quite a bit into our coverage here in New York City. What are the neighborhoods and the geography that will compel you to get a sense of where this is going? Right.
So we talked already about the folks who voted early, but the folks who come out on Election Day, you know, I'm going to be looking for what black voters do and how they turn out. Will they turn out for Mamdani because he's talking about this affordability message, or will they turn out for Cuomo, who is someone that they already know? Faith-based voters. We're talking about the Upper West Side and Upper East Side and other Jewish communities. Will they buy into the messaging that Mamdani has spewed anti-Semitism, which is what Andrew Cuomo has said, or will they make their own decision based off what he says has been Islamophobia in the race? South Asian voters are going to be a key block here as well. Young voters, voters under 35, have bought into his affordability messaging, and so could that be key? And then flexible Republicans and independents. Will they go with Cuomo or will they go with Mamdani? That's what we'll be looking at tomorrow.
You set the table for us nicely, Myles. Thank you so much. We should note Michael Bloomberg has endorsed Andrew Cuomo in the mayoral race and donated to a super PAC supporting Cuomo. Bloomberg is the founder and majority owner of Bloomberg LP, the parent company of Bloomberg TV and radio. Myles Miller, thank you, and we'll see you in our special coverage tomorrow evening. Joining us now to talk more about tomorrow's election day, this evening's political panel. They'll be with us too. Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, partner at Stone Court Capital, a Republican strategist, alongside Democratic analyst Jeannie Shanzano, Democratic visiting fellow at Harvard Kennedy School's Ash Center. It's great to have you both with us. Jeannie, let's start right here with you in New York, in your backyard. Do the polls have this captured properly? And if that's the case, if it's a double-digit blowout for Mamdani, is this an early night tomorrow?
It could be. If it is not, we are seeing some polls showing Cuomo tightening, and we are seeing that some of that early vote is coming from people over the age of 50, and the suspicion is that they may be going for Cuomo. So this could be tighter than the polls have suggested, but if Cuomo pulls this off, that is going to be an upset. I won't say, Joe, of the ages, but that'll be a big upset, and the pollsters will have egg all over their faces.
Wow.
So I think most of us, Frank, I think Rick and I talked about it earlier. We expect, we follow the polls, that Mamdani, pulls it out. And I think the question is one of margin. And if he was able to get over 50, that's an enormous win for him. I don't know if he gets there, though.
Fascinating. Rick, the early vote has been a really compelling factor here in New York, but also in Virginia, as you've pointed out, in Fairfax County alone. Presidential cycle level early voting, that plays in Democrats' favor?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Fairfax County has become a lot bluer than it used to be. And, you can't underestimate the impact of the news about government here, whether it's the early Doge firings or these furloughs related to the shutdown. And also just the general disruption of life here, with flight delays and things like that. All these things happening when people are actually turning out to vote. And so the fact that you've had such a massive vote in Fairfax County, Northern Virginia, is indicative of an energy that you see on the Democratic Party side, not on the Republican Party side. This is a off-year election, as Frank Luntz said, usually doesn't favor the party in power. And it certainly looks like that's going to be the case, at least in Virginia this time around.
Do you both agree with Frank Luntz, by the way, that it's a Democratic sweep tomorrow night, Jeannie? That includes Prop 50 in California.
I do think we are looking at that. I think the big race to watch in that regard is what happens in the New Jersey gubernatorial race.
Right.
Mykie Sherrill has not run the campaign that some Democrats wanted her to. She's still up in the polls a little bit. Citarelli has a lot of name recognition. He's been at this race before. And I think one big issue to watch in both New Jersey and Virginia, energy, electricity. Citarelli is making a big deal out of that in New Jersey, and it's also hitting in Loudoun County in Virginia because of the use of electricity, and those cost of living issues may be something that could turn this. But I think the other thing in both of these issues is the change candidate. A change candidate has an advantage, and of course, when you look at New Jersey, Mykie Sherrill is looking to make it a third-term Democratic governorship. That's harder for her than Spanberger in Virginia.
When you consider the Trump effect, specifically in New Jersey, Rick, the president on Truth Social this evening, Virginia and New Jersey, remember this, he writes, a vote for a Republican means substantially lower energy prices. He kicked out an almost word-for-word Truth post a couple of days ago on this with regard to energy. He says, vote for a Democrat, especially these two losers who are running, means a doubling, tripling, and even quadrupling of your energy costs. If you believe this is actually a one-point race, as a recent poll showed in New Jersey, should the president have done more than this town hall, the tele-rally he's doing this evening? He could be there stumping in person.
Yeah, look, I mean, I would say I disagree with Frank on New Jersey. I think there's a shot that Citarelli has to win there. And for exactly the reasons that Jeannie said, there's never been a party that's controlled the governor's mansion three terms in a row. I don't think it's going to be that way this year either. All the energy on turnout on Election Day is going to be Citarelli's. If you get 1,200,000 turned out on Election Day, Citarelli wins. So I think there's a real shot there to have that happen. But at the end of the day, the president really hasn't lifted a finger on any of these races. He endorsed Citarelli early in May for the primary, hadn't really done anything since then, did a teletown hall. That doesn't get you anything in a state like New Jersey where the media markets are so big. But that's the case, too, in Virginia and in California. I mean, the president really, his team dropped the ball when it came to that referendum, almost ceding five Republican losses in the House of Representatives to this referendum. So I think there will be a lot of questioning if we can pull out a win in New Jersey. I think all hail Citarelli. We'll try to spend some time talking about what a great guy he is. But you're dancing on the top of a pin on this one.
Yeah. What do you think of the funding issue? President Trump says if Mamdani wins the mayor's race, New York will see a cut in federal funding. If you live in New Jersey, that actually impacts your life. You don't have to live in Manhattan. We've already seen $18 billion in funding for infrastructure, including the Hudson Tunnel project, cut by this administration. How does that compel voters in New Jersey?
I think it's going to play a role. And when you were just asking Rick, you know, should the president have done more? Maybe not, but maybe he could have done less, because what he did on the tunnel, I think if Citarelli does lose, that could be a reason why, because you are going to see a strong reaction from people in New Jersey to a move like that. And I do think this threat is resonating with people in New York, people who are attracted to Mamdani. Some of them feel, New Yorkers, and we don't know the number, that it is risky because Donald Trump may try to take revenge when it comes to money. Who knows if that plays out, but I do think it's in the back of people's minds. He's like hanging over this election without being on the ballot.
Fascinating. I want to go back to our conversation with Mike Lawler, the Republican congressman from New York, who does not want to see a Democratic socialist be the next mayor. Here's what he said would happen if Mamdani is elected.
People are fleeing countries that promote these policies, whether it be in Eastern Europe or in South and Central America. They don't work. And yet here we are on the verge of electing an avowed socialist as mayor of New York City, the financial capital of the world. You will see a mass exodus out of New York. It's not just about federal dollars. The tax base will deplete because businesses and those who can afford to leave will. And that will be catastrophic for New York.
Rick, we've only got about a minute left. You work every day with people on Wall Street, is he right?
Absolutely. This is the last thing that certainly economic-minded voters are going to want, is somebody who really believes in sort of a redistribution of wealth. And I would remind everybody that right now, according to all the public polls, Mamdani is well south of 50%. In other words, there's 60% of the city of New York does not want him. It's just the fractional voting for two other candidates are going to keep him in the race. So a lot of this has to do with just bad political strategy on the part of the opposition.
Yeah, just 30 seconds. Jeannie, everyone moves to Florida if he wins. Is that the idea?
He might, but I also wish all of us, not you, Joe, but the rest of us elderly people would look and see why young people are so frustrated. When he says that, when Mike Lawler says that, what people are thinking, young people, is it doesn't work now, so we need something different. So make the system work, Mike Lawler. That's why they're frustrated.
Really interesting. Gives us a sense of what tomorrow might be like with Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. They'll be with us as part of our special election coverage. Be with us for an extended edition of Balance of Power tomorrow night. Again, it starts 5 p.m. Eastern, only here on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew. We'll see you back here tomorrow, only on Bloomberg.